Okay, I think we are live now. Shavua Tov, everyone. Shavua Tov, Avidan. We are here another week for starting, for doing the Havdallah, for learning together. And I think, Avidan, you brought us a very interesting text today.
Shavua tov, Shavua tov. Yes, I have something with me today. A text that I have been thinking about for a long time. I encountered it a few months ago, and this is a good week. This is a good week. It's the right week. Not that there's a wrong week, but this is an appropriate week to check this one out together, because it was delivered as a response to this parsha, to this week's parsha. This text is from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. I'm no scholar on Rabbi Nachman. I'm just a humble yid who is looking for some inspiration, and I found a little bit here. Um, and this Torah from Rabbi Nachman, um, written as a commentary on the first verse of Parshat Bo, which we read this week, um, explains how the world came into being. And I want to look at it together, to study and to talk about this core idea, from Rabbi Nachman and from Hasidic thought in general, about how it is that the world came into being, and what does it say about the complex nature of the world we live in, on a theological level, right? Sort of like in the biggest cosmic way, and also how that is just a microcosm, right? Macrocosm, the cosmos, and microcosm, the way you and I interact with each other, the way we interact with the people in our lives, um, um, in this way, in this balance. So I'm going to share my screen. Um, it's we have a few minutes together, which is just enough to realize how much there is to do. Um, but um, but this is an important text, and I hope for everyone that's with us, we continue to learn this together. We continue to think about what it means for us, and to keep diving into the depths of this Torah. And we're only going to look at that. We're only going to look at the beginning. So here we go. Torah Samach Daled 64 from Likutei Moharan, which is a collection of Rabbi Nachman's teachings, gathered together by his faithful student Rabbi Nassan, Rabbi Natan of Nemirov, who was his scribe. So the Torah begins like this: God said to Moshe, "Bo el Paro, go to Pharaoh." Right. This is just the first verse. The first verse of the parsha. For I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may set these signs of mine in their midst, that you might recount in the ears of your children and your grandchildren how I may have made a mockery of the Egyptians and of my signs which I have wrought in their midst, that you might know that I am God. That tomorrow I will bring locusts into your borders. So here, just for the context, right, we are in the part of the Exodus story of the 10 plagues. We are at plague number 8. Plague number 8. We've been through 7 plagues, and now we're coming to the final 3, right? Where Pharaoh is about to change his mind, and let the people go. And I was thinking, what's the connection? What's the connection between this parsha, or between this image of going to Pharaoh, and the following Torah? And so we'll get that to the end, but at the end. But I think that's the question, that Rabbi Nachman will answer here, and that we will discuss as well. So here we go. God created the world as a consequence of his compassion. Right? Hashem Yitbarach, God, as a consequence of his compassion, wanted to create the world. For he wanted to reveal his compassion, and if creation had not taken place, to whom would he show his compassion? He therefore created the entire creation from the inception of Atzilut all the way down to the center point of the corporeal world in order to display his compassion. So the question is here, right? How can there be a world if God is everywhere? Right? Why does God create the world? Right? And here Rabbi Nachman says that, right? The world is created because God wants to be compassionate. God wants partners. That, right? It's not to say that God needs anything, but that God has a want to have relationships, right? And wants to show compassion. And so therefore God thought to create the world. Okay, for compassion. And it's important to notice that the word compassion in Hebrew is rachmanut, Rabbi Nachman says, which is the same Hebrew root as the word for womb, rechem. So we already have this idea of, right, God and the world, God and people is like parents and children, right? Is like giving birth to the world. So we already have sort of that model, right? How we're going to look at God and the world in our own lives as parents and children. We run into an issue. Okay. Yet when God wanted to create the world, there was no place in which to create it, since there was nothing but Ein Sof, the infinite one. So this is a big idea in Kabbalah and in Hasidic thought, is that, right, when we think about God and we think about the earliest, right, sort of the most transcendent and grand version of God, we think about infinite. There was everything. Right? And this we sort of have to use metaphors, because how can we use human words to describe infinity? But basically, there was no room for anything else. Right? There was no room for anything else but God, Ein Sof, without end. All was God. So then the question becomes, where is there room for the world? Where is there room for people? Right? If God is everything, how can there be something that's not God? So how does Rabbi Nachman draw? He's talking with Luriana Kabbalah here. How do they interpret this? This idea of tzimtzum, and this is a big innovation in Kabbalistic thought. This idea of contraction, of tzimtzum, of God making God's self smaller in order to create space for the world. So Rabbi Nachman says, God therefore contracted the light to the sides, right? And through this contraction, the vacated space was made. This idea of the chalal hapanui, vacated space. So think about it. We have infinite, right? And then God is contracting, which then creates space for emptiness, right? All in that moment, right? It's not God, it's empty. It's chalal hapanui. It's nothingness. It's not God. Then within this vacated space, all time and space came into existence. This being the creation of the world, which is to say that now that you have some space, right, where God pulls God's self back, leaving a vacuum, right, sort of, right, empty space, that's where you can put the world. Right? So you have infinite, and then you create something that isn't infinite. You draw back, right, contracting the infinite, and that's where there is space to put that first creation, that first bit of the world. Right, last piece, because I know this is crazy stuff, but we'll think about it more in the coming weeks.
So just one question. So you're saying that the creation is part of some kind of divine emptiness? That's what the text is saying.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think I love that phrase. Like, what is divine emptiness? Right? That there's something empty, right? But even so, there's divinity in it. And I think what you're getting at is exactly the point of this, is to say things about God, like God is infinite or God is perfect, right? Things that sort of we take for granted when we talk about God, right? There's a paradox, which is God needs to be able to be finite, right? To be able to present God's self in finite, infinitude, is also a part of being infinite, right? So the paradox, let me see if I'm getting this right. If we say that God can only be infinite and never be finite, then we're actually saying that God is not infinite. Because God, as if to say that God cannot be anything but infinite. So actually, this emptiness is also divine, right? And the way that God manifests God's self in the emptiness, in the contraction, is also part of God's infinite perfection and all of those things. So this last paragraph, I think, is saying exactly that, right? And it's also a bit of a review, right? This vacated space was necessary for the creation of the world, since without the vacated space, there would have been no place in which to create the world, as explained above. Yet, understanding and comprehending this contraction that resulted in the formation of the vacated space will be possible only in the future, only at the end of time, since it is necessary to say about it two contradictory things, exactly as we said: existence and non-existence, yesh ve'ayin, that there is something there and there is something not there, right? Infinite and finite. And we have to hold those things together to affirm the existence of the world and the existence of God in our world. I'm not sure I totally understand this paradox, right? This is something that I think we need to spend a lot of hours and burn a lot of candles thinking about. But one thing that I do want to say about it is the ways in which we in our regular lives actually do have yesh ve'ayin, existence and non-existence, these two opposites in our lives. And that's the idea of machloket, of disagreement, right? Of challenging between two people, that Rabbi Nachman talks about later in this Torah, but that I think is an important message for the way we interact with one another. Because just in the same way that God, that there's infinite, right? If God is infinite and there's only Ein Sof, only infinity in the world, that there's no space actually for the world to exist. That there's only light, and that the only way the world will come into being is if you contract, or as if God contracts and lets there be this balance, this delicate balance between infinity and the space and this empty space, and they live in balance. And with machloket, you actually need that. We have that. We introduce that into our own lives as well. I think the model here is it's not good to have one opinion rule everything. Whether that's with a parent and a child saying, right, the parents always know what's best. Whether that's one ideology, a set of rules that dominate everything, because what that says is, right, these rules are everything, and that there's no space for anyone else, right? There's no space for otherness, and there's no space for disagreement. And what the model here is it's actually when we create space to have disagreement, that is actually the fullness of the world. That's how we have both yesh and ayin, and that we live in a world that there's room for each other. And sometimes it means contracting. Sometimes it means stepping back and saying, I actually don't know everything, right? I need to hear from you. And it's not about me convincing you that I'm right or you convincing me that you're right. It's about we both exist in our truths together. And that's why I love that the Talmud, for example, records not just the law, but the minority opinion. Is that right? We have many voices in our tradition that float in the air in disagreement, but within that disagreement, you create space. You create space for otherness, and I think if anything in this world, right, we are in a moment of crisis where we are having trouble sitting comfortably with otherness, with people that think differently than us, that vote differently than us, and I think we need to practice that a little bit more. So, um, and then to bring it back to the parsha, which Rabbi Nachman does at the end, that's the lesson of Bo el Paro, right? Go to Pharaoh, right? There are certain people, right? Moshe being one of them, but I think each of us has a little bit of Moshe in us. Is that Paro, right? Pharaoh is the representative of that empty space, right? Is that representative of the other, that we go into the empty space, that we need to be brave enough to venture into the empty space, and reckon with what it is in our lives that feels other, and try and figure out where we end and the other begins, and how we live in balance together. Wow. Thank you for letting me share that. That feels like the beginning of a long and public journey with this Torah.
Yes, no, it was. Yes, it gave a lot to think about. And man, while you were explaining about this otherness, like I was wondering if there is some limit to this kind of otherness that we should put in table. Like, what is the acceptable level of like disagreement of different opinion, and what happened when like there is so many otherness that it's almost impossible to enter one another realities. And even if we
Right.
said, yeah, like if we can put the example of the otherness with the Pharaoh, uh, like, is there any, like, going, like, without putting any limit, are we betraying our values sometimes? Are we betraying who we are?
Mm-hmm. Right. No, it's a good point, and I'm not sure if it requires saying that Pharaoh is correct. Right. I don't think it means we have to always say, we welcome you, Pharaoh, right? But maybe it's that we need to know that Pharaoh exists so that we know where we are as well. Right? We sort of use otherness to find ourselves, and then we can stand up for what we believe in, right? Then we can say, I am me I am I and in my context, and you are you. That's fine. But I am I because I am I, right? That's who I am. That's who I am in my fullness.
But in the same way, accepting this otherness of the Pharaoh is, by entering there, is like giving a voice to this otherness. And I'm thinking many times, like, as it is in today's politics, I do believe, like, many times we have given voices to some very extreme political views, and just by accepting that they were like others, like almost everyone distanced themselves from these like extreme views. But by accepting that these extreme views are like acceptable, that they can enter in debates, we are like giving them voices, and we're making them grow.
Right. No. Yeah. I think you're right. I don't think it requires giving those voices a platform. I would read it as sort of, um, in the balance of things, right? We hold machloket, right? We hold this disagreement, this tension, as the ideal, right? That it's not about wiping out those views and banishing them from the face of the earth, but that there we acknowledge that we have our position, and letting that sort of fill up the world in our way. But I think you have a good point, and I want you to have the last word, because I think that is where I find myself. That is where I find myself. So good. All right, let's do Havdallah. Here we go. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Atishbi, Eliyahu Agiladi, Bimera Beyamenu, Yavo Elenu, Yimashiach ben David, Yimashiach ben David. Hine el Yeshuati, Evtach v'lo evchad, Ki ozi ve'zimrat Yadonai, Vayili Yeshua, Ushavtem Aim Besason, Mimayne Yeshua, Adonai Yeshua, Lamcha, Bichatecha Sela, Adonai Tzevaot Imanu, Miskavlanu Elohei Yaakov Sela, Adonai Tzevaot Asher Adam Boteach Bach, Adonai Oshia Melech Yaneinu V'Yom Koreinu LaYehudim Ha'ita Ora V'Simcha V'Sason V'Ikar Ken Tielanu Kos Yeshuot Esau V'Shem Adonai Ekra. Nine, 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei peri agafen, Borei peri agafen, na 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 na. Nine, na 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 nine, 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 na 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 nine, 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 na 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 nine, nine, na 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 nine. Nine, nine, na 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 nine, 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 na 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 nine, 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 na 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 nine, nine, na 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 nine. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei minei besamim, Borei minei besamim, na 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 na. Nine, na 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 nine, 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 na 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 nine, 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 na 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 nine, nine, na 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 nine. Nine, nine, na 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 nine, 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh shananai nai na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai nai na na nai na 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 nai nai na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai nai na na nai na 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 nai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ben or lechoshech Ben Yisrael le'amim ben yom hashvi le'sheshet yemei hamaseh Baruch atah Adonai Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ananai nai na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai nai na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai nai na na nai na nai na Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, Avidan, and have an amazing week, you and everyone here today listening to us.
You too, Mickey. Take care.
Ciao.